I am by no means a brave man. I won't lie and say I couldn't have stopped this from happening if I tried, if I had just handled everything like I knew I should have. But I didn't, and I paid for it. The TV was filling my apartment with white noise as I tried to study, but I couldn't focus. Only a few hours before, I sent my girlfriend of 4 years a text message explaining my desire to break up. A fucking text message. I'm a sleazeball asshole, I know, but she had begun to scare me over the past few months. It wasn't major things at first, just a strange, unsettling turn in conversation. I could laugh it off, then. I convinced myself she had just a strange sense of humor, but after a while, it escalated to weirder and weirder things. She would command me to slap her and pretend to rape her during sex, calling me a bad lover if I refused. Occasionally, she would make me late to work by hiding my car keys until I roleplayed violently with her. When I talked to her about it, she just told me that real men were dominant with their women, and that I should be grateful to have such a willing girlfriend. I felt justified in breaking up with her, although my methods were misguided. In any case, I received a call as I expected, and it was Vicky. She spoke before I could even say hello. Why? It was a demand more than a question. It sounded as though she had been crying. It's a long story that you won't like, I said, hoping to discourage her from pursuing the issue. I secretly wished she would just hate me and ignore me forever. How long have you known? The sadness in her voice vanished instantly, leaving a cold, clinical tone behind. What? I asked earnestly. That we weren't meant for each other? Don't play fucking dumb with me, David, she hissed. Who did you see? Greg? I was sloppy with him. You had sex with Greg? I asked feebly, feeling the blood throbbing in my ears. He was a mutual friend of ours. Oh my god, you actually don't know. She seemed on the verge of laughter. I knew you were a dunce of a boy, but come on. Nobody can keep a secret like that forever. I had never heard her voice sound like this. Confident, slick, like a cat in a world of mice. I should have ended this so long ago. I tried to find some memory to disprove the suspicions, but I couldn't. I love you, David. She must have thought she sounded sweet, but her voice was positively overflowing with crazy. Please, don't leave me. I could turn you into the police, you know, I threatened. Sexual harassment charges. Do it, and I fucking kill you. Any doubt I had of guilt vanished. I felt my insides turn to ice at her words. Do you understand what I'm fucking telling you, David? I will fucking kill you, along with everyone you love. Answer me. I yelled out loud and hung up the phone hastily. I checked all the windows and doors to make sure they were sealed and locked. Then I remembered that Vicky was back in my hometown 3 states away. Better safe than sorry, I supposed. Of course, being the jackass I was, I didn't think to contact any of my loved ones to warn them. Later that night, as I was getting ready for bed, I got another call. To my relief, it was my mother. Hello? David, whatever is happening between you and Vicky, you can work it out together. She sounded strained, like she was flexing her abs the whole time she was speaking. Mom, how do you know about me and Vicky? Please call her right now and make up with her. She's a sweet girl, and you deserve each other. I still couldn't quite place what was wrong with my mom's voice, but something was definitely wrong. What's going on? Did she contact you? I asked. I bet she would even do anal if you got back together. My mom started weeping openly. Suddenly, I understood. She was reading from cue cards. "David, please." "Vicky, if you're there, don't you dare touch my mother," I shouted. There was the sound of a phone changing hands. "Listen to your mother. I love you, David. I love you. Please." I put the phone on speaker and tiptoed over to my junk drawer where there were a few old brick phones. I kept testing each of them to see if they had any battery power left. Even without a service contract, they would still be able to dial 911. "David, please, speak to me," she cued, insanely lacing her every word. "Don't make me do it, David. She fears death." Then she hung up. I don't really know what to do now. I've tried calling the police a few times, but for some reason, none of my phones are working. I'm terrified to leave my apartment, even though I know Vicky is hundreds of miles away. I'm considering driving home tonight. She was my mom. Okay, so this all happened about 3 years ago or so. I was around 17 years old. I'm not going to dramatize anything, but let me go ahead and say that I think personally that this is a pretty bizarre story. There are some details about my actual relationship I'm going to leave out. I kind of want an answer to this story/question, but I don't think I'll ever get one. I've been wanting to get some outside opinions on it aside from friends and family too. So, here it goes. My ex, Mary, and I lived about an hour away from each other. We met at a park out of state and ended up living kinda close. We hit it off and dated a month after we met. Our entire relationship lasted a year. She was my first girlfriend. From the very beginning of the relationship, she would discuss her best friend named Patrick. He was in his late 20s. She, as a reminder, was 17 and worked in a bookstore. He lived in her town and she had known him since she was 13. From very early on, I thought the stories she would tell me about him were outlandish. She would talk about watching him get into bar fights with a guy that went by Hammer, how once they pretended to rob a gas station but left the money behind on the counter and had to jump off a roof to escape security, in which Patrick broke his ankle. Another time, Patrick got a brand new Mustang that they wanted to crash into a lake, so they jumped out at the last second. She told me that one toward the end of our relationship, at which point I was completely skeptical of everything she said. You get the idea. The stories she told seemed clearly exaggerated or downright fake. Part of me thought she was just trying to impress me for whatever reason. Here's some other important facts about her. Mary was an artist. She drew all the time in her journal. She rarely drew people as they actually were. She drew people as monsters or animals. For example, she always drew me as a giraffe. She was good at it though. Patrick's last name, according to her, was pronounced and spelled a certain way. Willington. Patrick Willington. Patrick's dad owned a successful company out of state that Patrick would inherit. Mary had a much older brother who was in his late 20s as well, that had joined the military and moved to Korea. She only saw him every few years or so. Mary would tell me that Patrick was very protective of her. She would tell him about me and he would always be unsure of what he thought. She said he wanted to beat me up sometimes and that he'd hurt me if I hurt her. If she told him about something silly I did, he'd think I was an idiot and call me stupid. He also thought I was gay. This is all, of course, secondhand information. Never once in the entire relationship do I think I spoke to him. I'll get to that later. I'd like to also remind everyone that this was my first relationship. I was very insecure, very confused, and there was more going on in it that complicated some things. I did not have the best rationality, as you may have already deduced from how weird some of this sounds. The thing is, I really didn't have any reason not to believe her, you know? She had no reason to lie about any of this, but I was still skeptical. Sometimes Mary would go to Patrick's house really late at night. She said she'd sleep on his couch and that he would literally throw her out of the house in the morning. Sometimes, she said she had to sneak out of her house to go to his. He lived within walking distance, apparently. One time, later in the relationship, Patrick invited her on an out-of-state trip back to his hometown. They were going to stay in a mountain cabin for a week. I was not happy about that. I was more upset when she said she wouldn't tell her parents and that they'd leave on a bus in the morning. Now, at this point in the relationship, I was very unsure of what exactly was going on with this Patrick person. But Mary said that if I told her parents about this trip, that she wouldn't be able to go, and that Patrick would hate me and she'd be pissed. It was more important to her because Patrick apparently would be forced to move away soon to work at his dad's company, and she said she'd never see him again, so she needed to go. Well, when the day came for her to leave, also, I did discuss this with friends and family at the time. Patrick never showed up to get her or whatever. She was very upset, even though he'd be back in town one more time. On another tidbit, Mary's parents never once mentioned Patrick. Ever. She never brought him up around them either. The only time she mentioned Patrick to anyone else was to my dad once, after we broke up. She told my dad one of the outlandish stories I mentioned. Why she met my dad after we broke up is for a different, unrelated reason that I really don't feel the need to add to this story. My dad was flabbergasted, basically. I had told him about all this, but hearing it in person was crazy. Patrick was to have a birthday party once, before the mountain cabin trip thing happened. I was invited. It was going to be at his house starting at midnight. I said I couldn't go to that, but that I'd get him a present. I got him some toolkit things she said he'd like, and I gave it to her for him. She said she brought it and that he did in fact like it. She said the party lasted until 6 a.m. Patrick sent me a text from her phone once when she was with him. It was standard behavior from him. He said I was a pansy or something and that he'd beat me up. That was early on. I'm sorry things are a little out of order. I'm just kind of saying them as I remember. Now, here's where I think things get very interesting. Mary lived near an elementary school. She walked with me there and said his house was close to it. So, she leads me to the back of the school where there is woodland. She brings me to the edge of the woods and has me look in. I see this very old wooden tin house sort of structure. It has broken windows, it's filthy and it's falling apart. The path to it is covered by bushes and trees. She said that was his house. Oh, and at this point, he had moved to work at the company out of state. I asked if she was joking. She said no, and that he wasn't very tidy even when he lived there. I thought briefly that maybe the house was just weird looking on the outside, but actually good inside. But there's no way it was. It was abandoned. Anyways, the same day, she asked if I wanted to go inside. It was hot, getting dark, no one knew exactly where we were, and I didn't want to get cut up by bushes or go in the sketchy house. So I said maybe another time. She insisted, saying that Patrick wanted us to check on things, but eventually gave up. This was very close to the end of our relationship. I asked her a few more questions like, you went through those bushes and stuff every time you went to see him? And she said yes, but they had overgrown since he left. I also asked how he drove out of his house, how anyone visited him otherwise, how he got mail. She eventually realized that maybe I didn't exactly believe her and got mad. I said I was sorry and that it was just different to me. She insisted it was true. I let it go. Well, we ended up breaking up shortly after, but I had a hard time coping with the breakup and ended up speaking with her again later. She was on a bus with her class to go on some trip. Well, I lost connection with her and called back. A young man answered. I asked who it was. He said Patrick Willingson, not Willington. So I opened with a question about his last name and why he had her phone. He said that was always his last name. He said he was on his office phone. I kept asking him questions about himself that only the real Patrick would know. I heard noises in the background. He would pause for a minute before answering. I think she handed the phone to a classmate and told them what to say. Frankly, that's the only real answer to that. Well, he hung up, and I called her back. Mary answered and said that Patrick told her I somehow got connected to his phone, since he was in her recent contacts or something. Clearly bullshit, but I played along, asking one more time about the last name, to which she had no idea what I was talking about, saying it was always Willingson. And left it at that. Oh, and he wanted to beat me up, of course, badly for breaking her heart. Well, I kept speaking to her for a week or two, and we both finally got closure about the relationship, but as I was recounting this experience with a friend, I realized something. Probably just a creepy coincidence, but I had said Mary